Hello and welcome to The Entrepreneurs on Monocle Radio, the show all about inspiring people, innovative companies and fresh ideas in global business. Today's programme is a book special. First, we'll meet a serial entrepreneur and venture capitalist who wants to help women unlock capital and scale their businesses.
Building a big business is not about what you can handle, what you can do. It's about the big ideas that you can have and bringing people together to pull them off.
And later we'll hear from an entrepreneur who wrote the book, literally, on mastering that all-important work-life balance.
A very simple framework that I use for this is called you need a map to know where to go. And a map stands for the three things that you need in order to figure this out, which is meaning, anchors and priorities.
This is The Entrepreneurs, with me, Tom Edwards. You're listening to The Entrepreneurs. Now, our first guest wears many hats. Sarah Dusek is an entrepreneur, an investor, an activist, and a mother. With several successful businesses under her belt, Sarah is dedicated to helping women tackle disparities head-on and secure the funding needed to create impactful, large-scale ventures that make a real difference. Her new book, Thinking Bigger, aims to help women do just that by giving them insights into unlocking capital. And it's a newly minted #1 bestseller on Amazon. Sarah stopped by Midori House to talk about the book, and she began by telling me what prompted her to start writing.
When I was building my first big business that I managed to sell for a lot of zeros in 2018, I had enormous trouble trying to raise capital. And so the challenge as a female entrepreneur, not just to grow and build a big business, to put the capital in to fuel the growth of a big business was really hard. And I found the venture capital industry quite offensive, to be honest. And the struggle to find like-minded people who wanted me to win and who wanted them to win was tough. And I kept thinking to myself, I just don't feel like it has to be like this. I just don't think it has to be this aggressive. I don't think it has to be, I'm going to get screwed and you're going to win. And the whole environment of it, I found very difficult. And I also found it complex and difficult to understand. And like, you know, playing a card game or a game of chess that you just don't understand the rules for, and not having enough knowledge or business acumen to understand the financing world. And I thought that was me. I thought that was my lack of knowledge, lack of exposure, and that I just was a bit soft in the head and, you know, just wasn't sharp enough to be sort of playing with these big boys. And I thought to myself while I was going through that process, if I ever sell my business, if my business ever becomes worth anything, I'm going to support and help other female entrepreneurs do this and try and change the system. And so I wrote this book to help decode the mystery of financing and raising capital, with this idea of helping women speak the language that is being spoken by venture capitalists, help them understand how venture capitalists are thinking, and help them navigate some of the pitfalls, some of the blind spots, some of the complexities of engaging in, you know, what is often quite a sharky world.
One of the things that strikes me, Sarah, from those remarks even is, it reminds me a little bit about conversations we have around investing in a more intentional or responsible and sustainable way, which is that there was for a long time this misperception that, doing the right thing would cost you money. You know, you could make the choice, but the compromise was poorer returns. Whereas, of course, in point of fact, most of those investment products and innovations outperform the market.
100%.
And the thing I just continue to be incapable of understanding is that if you just step back from it and say, well, forget about your view on the patriarchy or anything, just look at performance.
Yep.
Do these female-founded businesses compete? It's not just that they compete, they almost always do better.
Yep.
So why do we have to have this conversation? Why do we need primers like this when you could just look at the numbers?
The data.
Yeah. So
the data's good.
What's the problem? Is it a problem that actually people are not looking just at the bottom line? They're bringing all these biases in.
We've definitely got bias in the system. There's no way around it. And the financing world has historically been a big boys club. And you had to know someone who knows someone, or you had to go to school in a particular way or move in a particular, arena to be connected. And often the venture capital world very much works on connections. So it's who you know, who knows you, who you're associated with that kind of gets you in the door. And then after that, you know, you have to have a good proposition and somebody has to believe that they can make money on you, right? So part of the problem is getting in the door in the first place. Women are not as well connected and not moving in the same kind of arenas. But one of the things I noticed, which, you know, whilst we can't do a lot about that, one of the things we can do something about is we can build the kind of businesses that are investable. And one of the things I have noticed over the last few years with working with female entrepreneurs is often we're not thinking big enough. We're not presenting our businesses in a way that say, I'm building $100 million business, I'm building a £1 billion business. We're not positioning ourselves in a way often that attracts the attention of big money. And that's part of sort of the other chicken and egg kind of scenario. Yes, we've got bias in the mix, but are we also showing up in a way that big money is going to understand? And are we using the language and a framework of presenting our businesses and building the kind of businesses that have the possibility of attracting big funding?
Yeah, actually, and Sunira Madani writes about that in the foreword to your book, that question of the ambition. Are things getting better? If we go back to even, let's look at the sort of the under canvas story, obviously then, and that was a sort of classic entrepreneurial tale. The level of commitment in the early days of that, the level of jeopardy, it is the sort of classic entrepreneurial story, if you like. Are you confident that we are seeing, I mean, I'm sure you would say progress is not fast enough, but are we making progress on some of these bigger challenges of upturning some of these preconceived ideas, challenging some of these biases? Is it getting at least better, even iteratively?
The stats don't say things are getting better. No, I'd love to say yes. We're getting loads better. We're making lots of progress. The data just doesn't say that. And the statistic of, 2% of all venture capital going to female founders has been that statistic for 25 years or more. I mean,
and let's pause there, Sarah.
It's rarely changed.
2%. Just,
2%.
Let that figure reverberate
which
around.
Means 98% of all funding is going to male founders. Now, the consequence of that in my own head, just rationally, says there is a specific segment of people who are being funded to build our world. Now, I think of businesses as the building blocks of what our world looks like. We build businesses and we build the future because businesses change culture, they change our behaviour, they change how we operate and do things in the world. They are, integral to everything about society. So if we are only funding a certain segment of society to build our world, we're going to leave a heck of a lot of people behind. 50% of the population's not being built for. And we're not creating a world that takes all of us into account to build a world that works for all of us. And that's why we end up with, huge inequality issues, huge disparities in wealth, and these perpetuate ongoing massive issues in our world. And, it just comes back to, well, how are we investing in our world? Who is getting access to capital? Because capital is power, unfortunately, but it is. And so we should all be concerned by who's getting big money to change our world.
And it's funny because I was digging around ahead of talking to you, and some of the stats, even looking at the UK, US, I always kind of lazily thought, it's broadly the same picture in terms of funding for female founders. But there are, I think it's something like 30% fewer female entrepreneurs in the UK than the US. 30% fewer. And I think it's something like 3% of funded businesses being female founded in the UK, which is, it's completely extraordinary.
The stats do get slightly better.
Well, come on, this is what I was going to say. Please, what can you offer us? Obviously, we've got this primer.
Have a male co-founder. That increases, the data points are a little bit better for mixed teams. So where you've got a male and female co-founder, the percentage goes up to something like 17%. Okay,
so a nudge in the right direction. Well, look, let's be positive because we don't want to. I think it's a bit like talking about climate crisis. You're just
yes.
look,
what can we do about it?
The problem is too big. We can't do anything.
But we can.
So we start chipping away. Obviously, this book offers a kind of a hands-on primer for female founders who are in this process, and actually lots of the kind of testimonials and actually lots of the insights in there are very pragmatic, which is obviously super helpful. But if I often ask people on this program, if a lay listener is saying, well, yes, but what should I do? What can I do? I'm maybe not going to found my own business, or, well, I've done this and I've done my exit and I'm done. What should people where this injustice and the problems that are attendant by not challenging it, if that strikes a chord with people, what should they do, Sarah?
I think there's two sides to answering that question. One is, if you are an entrepreneur, and often women don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs, they think of themselves as small business owners. And often women have been conditioned to think about building small businesses and running lifestyle businesses because we also have to manage children and homes, and the struggle of that is real. But often we haven't sort of put the right hat on our heads, and often we haven't seen our own potential. We've often capped our own potential just by thinking about what can I manage. And women often fall into that trap of getting stuck with, I just can't handle any more. I can't think about doing any more than I'm already doing. And I just to that woman, I would say building a big business is not about what you can handle. It's not about what you can do. It's about the people you can assemble, the big ideas that you can have, and bringing people together to pull them off. And actually, in a lot of ways, building a big business is easier than having a small business because you are less involved in the nitty-gritty day-to-day, and you bring in more people to make things happen. And obviously, that's a bit of a mind shift. And I talk quite a lot about in the book is like how we shift from thinking about a small business mindset to thinking about a scalable, growing business. So I think that's the first thing I'd like to challenge, because only 2% of all women in business ever build businesses that do more than £1 million in revenue. So we've still got a very small segment of women building the kind of businesses that could be larger than £1 million, for example. So that's maybe the first thing. The second thing is we all have a role to play in funding the future. And all of us potentially could be angel investors. And often we think, I don't know anything about anything. Investing in businesses, I don't know. But there are ways to get involved with other groups of people to do angel investing. And I genuinely think the returns of backing early stage businesses, and it's definitely high risk, but definitely high reward. And we need more people stepping up into the space, either to use philanthropic capital, as a catalyst for supporting early stage businesses, or investment capital that you would hope to see a return on to engage in supporting under-supported founders, either female or people of colour.
I mean, it's interesting, I think, because there's an attendant benefit as well in the development of, I don't know what you'd call it, almost like social capital, where you realise in the UK, it's not great here. Whether, we look at Northern Europe or other places in the world that just seem to have a more cohesive idea of social value building. And there's a huge payoff, which is maybe the metrics are maybe slightly more nebulous, but there's such an attendant benefit there as well. I wonder, do you get asked to do, will you come and speak to a school and tell people that this is my experience, this is the transformational impact of what entrepreneurship can do in your life and to your business and to your cohort? Presumably we need to make sure we're starting from the ground up. I don't know, and again, we shouldn't shy away from that. That's a big undertaking, but we should do that, right? I mean,
we should totally do that. I think entrepreneurship is still seen as a bit of a left field career. It's very uncertain. It's kind of got no predictable path, right? So I think from an educational perspective, we teach business studies at school, but we think we teach business studies in the sense of going to work for someone else's business or being a manager in someone else's business. We often don't teach entrepreneurship and don't teach value creation from the get-go. And I think there's a lot we can do there in that space, and that's how we stimulate an economy. That's how we build a nation. That's how we export our goods and services around the world. And that's really a missing middle. And so I have teenage boys myself, and just recently there was a notice that went out to all the parents, said, would you like to come in and, talk about what you do for a living? And the idea of entrepreneurship being what you do for a living is still really unusual, and unusual for kids to hear, for sure, particularly girls.
Tell me about what's next. Obviously, I guess this is very exciting. You get to, talk to people about the book and talk about some of the impacts that you're hoping that it has. But yeah, what's next for Sarah? Where will you be? I don't know if we spoke to you in a year's time. Where would we find you? What would you be doing? Or do you not know yet? Is that part of the fun?
Oh, no, I do. I do know. I am launching my newest travel/climate business as we speak. So we've just launched a company called Few and Far. So this will be my second travel company. This time I built a very sustainable travel business in the US before, which the book documents the journey of building that company under canvas. And now we're thinking about building a regenerative travel company. How do we build a company that at its very core is about investing in our planet? Regenerating, rewilding, restoring vast areas of wilderness and creating extraordinary travel experiences to be in that wilderness at the same time. So that's what we're working on saving the planet and making extraordinary travel experiences happen at the same time.
You don't shy away from a challenge, Sarah, do you?
No,
it strikes me.
I spoke at an event recently and someone said, gosh, you're such an overachiever. What some people would have packed up and, be sipping a pina colada on a beach by now. And, the interesting thing about that is it's really great sipping pina coladas on beaches for about 5 minutes. But if you are wired to want to drive change and you are wired to want to make things better in the world and, make big things happen, then it's hard to not be making big things happen. So my hope for the book is that we help plenty of other women make big things happen and to keep on driving the change that we want to see too.
That was Sarah Dusek, the author of Thinking Bigger, a pitch deck formula for women who want to change the world. And the book is published by Georgetown University Press and is available now. You're listening to The Entrepreneurs. Tim Duggan describes himself as an optimist who enjoys thinking about big ideas. An entrepreneur who co-founded several digital ventures in Australia, Tim is now a best-selling author with 2 award-winning books on entrepreneurship and creativity. His new volume, Work Backwards, explores how we can rethink work, blending insights from top career and happiness experts with hands-on tools and exercises to turn theory into action. Tim stopped by Midori House to talk about the new landscape of work, the importance of slowing down, and how to navigate generational differences for a better work-life balance. Tim began by telling our Laura Kramer about the inspiration behind Work Backwards.
So 3 things happened that made me think about the ideas in this. The first one was that after 15 years of running my company in Sydney, I left, and I chose to leave. And it was something that I didn't realise how much of my identity was caught up in my job until I was no longer there. And I left in the middle of COVID. And my last meeting with my staff of 65 people was on Zoom. So you can imagine I'm sitting there in my home office. There's a green light and it's Friday afternoon and we have virtual drinks. We say goodbye and then I close the computer and I'm just sitting alone in my room by myself, and it set off a bit of a questioning of who am I without my job title. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened, which is something that affects all of us, which was COVID and pandemic and thinking about how we work and why we work and all the changes that came from that. And the third thing that happened was that my father passed away, and my dad was the biggest influence on my life. And when anyone close to you passes away, it makes you stop and think and reconsider and figure out, am I living my life in the way that I want to be living my life? And so all of that turned into me researching for a few years the future of work and figuring out, are we working in the right way? Is it broken? And because I'm an optimist, if it is broken, how can we fix it?
Tell me about the research. What were you discovering and which themes really excited you? I'd love to hear about the methods as well.
So there was 3 main themes that started to emerge. And this is from reading countless research papers, from traveling the world, speaking to experts. I spent a lot of time in places like Finland, who have a really interesting relationship with work and a really interesting relationship with the life-work balance and how they are able to incorporate work into their life. And 3 themes started to develop. The first was that, in general terms, most of us are overworked. So we are working longer hours than we ever have. Even when we work from home, even if we might have a hybrid job, we are in fact working longer hours. Microsoft did a study during COVID when they looked at how long people spent on Teams, their software, when they were in the office versus how long people worked on it when they were at home. And they actually found that the average workday increased by 13% in a post-COVID world. So we are working more than we ever have. The second trend was that a lot of people are disengaged with work. So we're not getting enough meaning from our jobs. One of the most depressing pieces of research that I came across was a Gallup research, which interviewed 1,000 people in 160 different countries. So it's a really large sample size. And they essentially found that about 3/4 of people said that they were either actively or passively disengaged from work. So it's statistics like this that made me realize what is going on. And the third trend was apprehension, particularly the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of automation. People are a little bit scared as to what is going to happen to their jobs in the coming years and decades. So put those three things together, overwork, disengagement, apprehension, and you essentially have a view of the way that we're working that is not going in the right direction. I like to look for solutions once I've really understood a problem. And I spent a few years going deep into this problem to really understand it, to enable me to try and find some solutions to it. Because it's one thing to come here and spout negative statistics around all the ways that work is broken. That's not going to help someone who's listening. So I then tried to really spend a lot of time trying to think of what are some of the solutions to this? How can we fix a broken work system?
Well, let's dive into the solutions. What can readers expect to find in the book, and what advice do you have for them?
So obviously there's structural problems here that one book is not going to solve. So I need to say that up front. Hopefully we can elect representatives that are able to solve some of these structural problems with inequality and things like that. But what we do have control over is how each of us as individuals think about work. And I propose that we are thinking about it in the wrong way. So most of us are thinking about work first. So I'm going to get a job straight from university or straight from school or get an apprenticeship. Then that job's going to give me some money. And then off the back of that, that money will allow me to live a life that I can based on that. So I call that work, money, life. And that is one of the core reasons why there's all these statistics going in the wrong direction. And we need to rethink that and think life first, then how much money do I actually need to live that life that I want? And then and only then, what work should I be doing, or how can I tweak my current role to enable me to live that sort of life I want to live? And I think that's the one takeout that I want someone who reads my book or hears this or is thinking about their role and work and what they want the new year to look like. It's just to stop and think. And a very simple framework that I use for this is called you need a map to know where to go. And a map stands for the three things that you need in order to figure this out, which is meaning, anchors, and priorities. So meaning means knowing and understanding what meaning you get from work and what meaning you get outside of work. Anchors is another word for core values around what makes you you. And priorities is thinking about the 4 ways that you could be spending time, which is work, your mind, your body, and your relationships, and figuring out which of those you actually want to prioritize.
I really like how you guide people through the book with these interactive elements, like worksheets and quizzes to really help them figure things out. It's very practical.
Yeah, I'm a very practical person and I love being inspired, and I like someone showing me the science and proving why I should think a certain way, but then let me get into it. Give me a pad and a piece of paper and some exercises and I'm in my element. So this is the third book that I've written. At the end of every chapter in all of my books is a section I call IRL, which stands for in real life, which is great. You've inspired me. You've told me what I should do. Now, how can I actually put it into action? And I love that because people come up to me with my books all the time and they've scribbled it through the pages, or they've downloaded worksheets and they've folded it back and forward, or the book's got all of these post-it notes in it. And I just adore that because books are meant to be used.
Yeah, I love that. What does this look like in practice? Makes sense. I wanted to ask because there is a common theme on social media. It's a trend. I'm sure you've seen it. It's very popular, but I think it does also frustrate some people, like this idea of quote unquote act your wage. I'd love your thoughts on this because it's a new way of thinking. We've had some entrepreneurs also kind of express concern about motivating the younger generations, for example. How does all of this fit in with Gen Z's approach? And are they maybe already applying concepts from the book without realizing it?
So every generation thinks about work differently. And it's based on macroeconomic factors, what's going on in the world when they're growing up. It's going on how they interact with their older siblings and their parents and what they react against and for. And Gen Z have a really interesting view on work. And it's often written off as though they are lazy or they're entitled or they don't care about work because they don't give it 110%, which is what generations above them are used to doing. And I actually think that Generation Z have it correct. I think they think about work for the long term, not the short term. And what I mean by that is I think they realize that we're going to be working for 40 years. So you can't just go all out in your 20s and your 30s and give everything to work and then just get burnt out and try and figure out what went wrong. They look at their older brothers and their older sisters and their parents and they see them burning out. They see millennials and Gen Xers above them and realize that they potentially have sacrificed too much on the altar of work and they have a different relationship with work. And I think we actually have a lot that we could learn from those generations, which is you need to have a life outside of work. You are going to be a better employee in the office if you are happy and content and fulfilled outside the office. So I think they concentrate a lot on their life outside the office, outside the workplace, so that they can come to the office and dedicate and be on and give it whatever they can while they're in the office, and then they can switch off. And that's something that a lot of older generations can't do.
Yeah, clearly a balance that all generations need to strike. When to work and build these incredible businesses and brands like you did, but also when to shut off. On that note, what excites you most about the future? If there's one key takeaway maybe you hope people get from this book, what would it be?
One thing I'm most excited by is the fact that everyone's future of their own work is unique. And I think more of us are realizing that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all process to this. So what I find useful for my future of work is different to what your future of work will be. And I think more and more people are starting to understand that and realize that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. Sometimes when I've done talks and press around the book, someone says to me, "Tell me, how many days a week should we be working in the office?" And the answer is, it depends. And that's not as exciting for people to hear because they want it handed down from on high. So I think understanding that everyone's future of work is completely unique is one thing that I want people to take away.
And I know you're super busy. I'm scared to ask, but are you already thinking about a fourth book? Is it too soon?
I'm starting to think about a fourth book. For me, it starts off as small thoughts and ideas, and it needs to be something that's going to grab my attention for a couple of years that takes to write and research, and then audience's attention for the next couple of years that it takes to think about it. I wrote my first book, Cult Status, in the late 20-teens, and I'm still talking about it every day now. And so it needs to be a topic that's going to have longevity and that's going to be really useful and interesting to people as well as myself.
That was Tim Duggan, the author of Work Backwards, The Revolutionary Method to Work Smarter and Live Better, which is published by Wiley and available now. And that's all for this episode of The Entrepreneurs. We'll be back at the same time next week. The programme was produced by Laura Kramer with audio editing by Jack Dewars. You can listen again and find out more about the show at monocle.com. That's where you can subscribe to Monocle magazine and read more about better businesses every month. You can also follow us and catch up with the archive of past editions wherever you get your podcasts. To contact the Entrepreneurs team, do feel free to email Laura. She's on lrk@monocle.com. I'm Tom Edwards. Goodbye, and thanks for listening to The Entrepreneurs.